It is midnight during a brutal Utah blizzard, temperatures plummeting below freezing. Inside a silent suburban home, a woman's purse, keys, and phone sit untouched on the kitchen counter. A carpet fan hums in the living room, slowly drying 2 wet spots on the floor. Yet, her husband tells investigators a story defying all logic. He claims he just packed their 2 toddlers into a minivan and drove into the pitch-black, sub-zero desert to go camping. He returned. She did not. This is a descent into a meticulously documented nightmare. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Susan Cox was born into an environment defined by community, structure, and faith. Raised in Puyallup, Washington, her daily life revolved around the local LDS ward. Her personality acted as a natural magnet, bubbly, meticulously organized, and unfailingly optimistic. She was the woman who remembered every obscure anniversary, organized neighborhood events, and possessed a loud, infectious laugh that could cut through a crowded room. Professionally, she worked as a cosmetologist. The busy, chatty atmosphere of a hair salon perfectly suited her highly social nature, allowing her to connect with dozens of people daily. Yet behind this bright, outward-facing exterior lay a singular, unwavering life goal. She desperately wanted to build a traditional, loving family unit, grounded in her religious convictions. She envisioned the quiet stability of a suburban home, a devoted husband, and children to raise in her faith. It was a simple, culturally ingrained ambition, one that ultimately made her deeply vulnerable. Josh Powell emerged from a fundamentally different reality. He presented himself as a quiet, somewhat socially awkward young man attending church singles activities. He wore the standard attire, spoke the right vocabulary, and projected the image of a faithful member looking for a wife. But this religious devotion was entirely manufactured, a social camouflage worn to infiltrate a community he privately did not respect. The true architect of Josh's psychological framework was his father, Susan Powell. To understand the man Susan would marry, one must examine the deeply insular, suffocating environment Stephen cultivated inside his own home. Stephen was a domineering, intellectually arrogant figure who openly mocked organized religion. He demanded absolute cult-like reverence from his children. Inside his house, the atmosphere was heavily policed. Stephen viewed women primarily as objects of visual consumption and possession, a profoundly toxic ideology he systematically passed down to his sons. He obsessively documented his surroundings, frequently carrying a camcorder and keeping meticulous, inappropriate journals, a habit of constant surveillance that normalized extreme invasions of privacy for his boys. Within that family dynamic, normal boundaries simply did not exist. Stephen engineered a system where his children were utterly dependent on him for emotional validation. He pitted the siblings against one another, rewarding absolute loyalty and ruthlessly punishing independent thought. The Powell boys were taught that the outside world was inherently hostile, ignorant, and inferior. Only the patriarch could be trusted. Josh absorbed these lessons down to his marrow. He learned to weaponize silence. He was conditioned to view relationships as transactional and to assert dominance not through physical force, but through relentless, passive-aggressive manipulation. While Susan was raised to build bridges with her community, Josh was trained from infancy to burn them, isolate his targets, and hoard control. When the two crossed paths at a church function in 2000, the collision of their worlds was entirely masked. Susan was a trusting, eager 20-year-old looking for a partner to fulfill her familial dreams. Josh, several years older, was a socially stunted observer armed with a rigid, patriarchal worldview. Susan saw a reserved, devout man who just needed drawing out of his shell. She could not perceive that Josh was operating as a direct extension of Stephen's oppressive ideologies. The courtship moved with alarming speed. Josh mirrored her religious enthusiasm just long enough to satisfy her baseline expectations. He suppressed his inherited misogyny, playing the role of a supportive, albeit quiet, fiancé. They married in April 2001. The wedding was celebrated as the beginning of a beautiful, traditional life. In reality, the foundation of their union was built on a calculated deception, locking a vibrant young woman into a psychological siege that would quietly escalate over the next 8 years. The illusion of a traditional marriage evaporated within months of the ceremony. Once the certificate was filed, the quiet, agreeable facade melted away, replaced by a rigid obsession with control. The initial battleground was not physical, it was financial. Despite holding down steady employment at the salon, the young wife was systematically stripped of all access to her own earnings. Her paychecks were deposited into accounts she could not access. Purchasing basic necessities required submission to a grueling, demeaning interrogation. She had to justify the cost of groceries, toiletries, and clothing, often facing severe reprimands for spending a few extra cents. This financial strangulation was a deliberate mechanism of isolation, designed to make her entirely dependent on a husband who viewed her not as a partner, but as an acquired asset to be managed. In 2004, the couple relocated to Washington State, moving directly into the home of her father-in-law. This environment was immediately suffocating. The house was a cluttered, oppressive space where the patriarch's word was absolute law. The air always felt heavy, thick with unspoken tensions and the constant, unnatural feeling of being watched. Normal boundaries simply did not exist within those walls. The patriarch's behavior quickly shifted from overbearing to overtly predatory. He developed a deep, unnatural fixation on his daughter-in-law. It started with small, invasive actions, spiriting away her undergarments from the laundry room and hoarding them in his private quarters. Then, the camcorder, a staple in that surveillance-heavy household, was weaponized against her. He would secretly film her from behind while she washed dishes, folded clothes, or watched television. He would zoom in on her body, muttering explicit commentary under his breath. This relentless stalking culminated in a deeply disturbing private confrontation. He cornered her in the house, confessing a severe sexual infatuation and insisting they were meant to be together, completely disregarding the fact that she was married to his own son. Terrified and disgusted, she took the encounter to her husband, desperate for a protector. She received nothing but cold apathy. He did not confront his father. He did not defend his wife. He essentially shrugged off the predatory behavior, implying that the older man's actions were normal, or worse, that she had somehow invited the unwanted attention. This betrayal fractured something permanent in the relationship. She realized then that she was completely alone, trapped in an isolated family ecosystem that operated on a perverse set of rules. She was not a wife to be protected, she was property. Desperate to escape the predatory environment of the Washington house, she orchestrated a move to West Valley City, Utah. The physical distance provided a temporary illusion of relief, and the subsequent births of their 2 young boys shifted her focus entirely to motherhood. But the change in geography did not change the man she married. Without his father's daily influence, he simply adopted the patriarch's role entirely. His psychological manipulation evolved. He began aggressively attacking her faith, the very foundation of her identity, mocking her beliefs and forbidding her from bringing the children to church services. He wanted to sever her final tie to the outside community. His financial grip tightened to absurd, punitive levels. He canceled her health insurance without telling her, leaving her vulnerable. In the dead of winter, with temperatures dropping well below freezing, he refused to let her use the family minivan. Instead, he forced her to commute to her salon job on a bicycle. She spent mornings pedaling through heavy snow and ice, fingers numb, while the vehicle sat completely unused in their driveway. It was a calculated humiliation designed to break her spirit. He dictated exactly what she could eat, complaining endlessly about the cost of food while secretly hoarding resources and spending money on expensive power tools for himself. The isolation was nearly complete. She was exhausted, financially ruined, and emotionally battered. By 2008, her situational anxiety morphed into a cold, terrifying certainty. She knew he was capable of violence, even if he had never left a visible bruise. Recognizing that her life was in active danger, she began taking covert steps to protect herself and her children. She secretly opened an independent bank account. She rented a hidden safe deposit box at a local branch, paying for it in cash so there would be no paper trail. Then, she picked up a handheld digital camera. Hiding in her home office, listening intently for the sound of his heavy footsteps on the stairs, she hit record. The faint glow of the LCD screen illuminated her pale, exhausted face in the darkened room. Speaking in hurried, hushed tones, She documented the psychological abuse, the financial ruin, and the escalating unspoken threats. She compiled a hidden file containing a handwritten will, explicitly stating that if she were to die, it would not be an accident. She detailed his volatile temper and his absolute refusal to grant a divorce. She locked the tapes, the will, and her private journals inside the safe deposit box. She was methodically laying down a breadcrumb trail from the grave, knowing that when the time came, her voice would need to survive her. Sunday, December 6th. The Salt Lake Valley sat trapped under a thick inversion layer, the grim precursor to a massive winter storm moving in from the northwest. The temperature hovered in the low 30s, the air sharp and biting. Inside the split-level home on Sarah Circle, the morning unfolded with an eerie, mundane precision. The wife dressed her 2 young boys, wrestling them into their heavy winter coats, and drove the short distance to their local LDS ward. She thrived in this environment. She moved through the chapel corridors with purpose, organizing playdates, chatting with neighbors, and anchoring herself in the community. She was highly visible. Her husband remained at home. He preferred the enclosed, controlled environment of his home office, the glow of the computer monitor, and the absolute silence of an empty house. By early afternoon, the mother and sons returned to Sarah Circle. The sky outside had bruised to a deep, heavy purple. The wind picked up, whistling through the bare branches of the suburban trees and rattling the frosted window panes. A female friend from the congregation arrived shortly after for a casual visit. The presence of a guest forced a temporary truce upon the household. The women sat together in the living room, discussing holiday plans while the boys played on the carpet. But as the afternoon bled into the early evening, the atmosphere inside the home began to subtly fracture. The husband, a man who meticulously avoided domestic labor, suddenly inserted himself into the routine. He announced he was making dinner. He moved around the cramped kitchen with a bizarre, focused, manic energy, preparing a batch of homemade pancakes. The heavy scent of hot cooking oil and sweet batter filled the room, masking the underlying tension. He served a plate directly to his wife. She ate while sitting on the couch next to her friend. The physiological reaction was almost immediate. A profound, unnatural lethargy washed over her. The vibrant, highly social woman who had been organizing community events just hours earlier suddenly could not keep her eyes open. Her words began to drag. Her limbs felt weighted with lead. She repeatedly mentioned feeling dizzy and overwhelmingly exhausted. Unable to fight the sudden chemical heaviness pulling her down, she excused herself, walked unsteadily down the short hallway, and collapsed into her bed. She was asleep within minutes, fully clothed. The visiting friend noted the abrupt physical decline. It was strange, unsettling, but entirely out of context for a suburban Sunday evening. Assuming it was merely sudden fatigue, the friend gathered her coat around 5 p.m., stepped out into the freezing driveway, and drove away. The front door clicked shut. The deadbolt engaged. The house was sealed. What transpired inside the walls of Sarah Circle over the next 7.5 hours remains a terrifying reconstruction of physical evidence and missing logic. Outside, the promised winter storm slammed into the valley. Heavy, wet snow began to fall in blinding sheets. The barometric pressure plummeted, and the wind chill dropped toward 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the home, the silence of the evening was broken by the aggressive, mechanical roar of industrial equipment. 2 distinct wet patches soaked the living room carpet, directly adjacent to the couch where the wife had eaten her meal. The synthetic fibers had been vigorously scrubbed. A large, high-velocity carpet fan was pulled into the center of the room and plugged directly into the wall. Its motor whined continuously, blasting cold air across the damp spots, filling the enclosed space with the sharp, sterile chemical odor of heavy-duty upholstery cleaner. A few feet away, illuminated by the harsh overhead fluorescent light of the kitchen, sat a visual paradox. The wife's heavy winter coat remained draped over a dining chair. Her purse rested squarely on the laminate counter. Inside the leather bag were her car keys, her wallet, her identification, and her cell phone. Her entire logistical lifeline to the outside world remained perfectly undisturbed, bathed in the artificial kitchen light, while the storm raged against the glass. Midnight approached. The tension in the narrative violently spikes here. According to the husband's official timeline, he He looked out the window at the swirling blizzard, noted the sub-zero temperatures, and decided this was the optimal moment for a spontaneous family camping trip. He did not wake his deeply sedated wife. He did not pack her winter gear. He did not leave a note. Instead, he moved into the boys' bedroom. He lifted the 2 sleeping toddlers, aged 2 and 4, from their warm beds. He carried them, limp and drowsy, out the front door and into the biting, freezing wind of the driveway. He strapped them into their car seats in the back of the family minivan. He loaded a small, gas-powered portable generator, a few blankets, and some plastic snow sleds into the back cargo area. The sheer logistical madness of this action defies all basic human instinct. Loading small, vulnerable children into a freezing vehicle at 12:30 a.m. during a severe winter weather advisory without notifying their mother is a scenario completely devoid of reason. The minivan's engine turned over. The headlights cut a narrow, swirling path through the heavy snowfall. The vehicle backed out of the driveway, tires crunching loudly over the accumulating ice, leaving the brightly lit, humming house behind. The route taken was an intentional dive into absolute desolation. The minivan rolled through the empty, snow-packed streets of West Valley City, bypassing the safety of the interstate. It headed south along State Route 36, driving deeper into the pitch-black void of the Tooele County perimeter. The destination was not a commercial campground with facilities, lighting, or park rangers. The destination was Simpson Springs. Simpson Springs sits in the remote heart of the West Desert along the historic Pony Express Trail. It is a harsh, unforgiving expanse of rugged dirt, jagged rock formations, and low-lying sagebrush. In the summer, it is an arid oven. In the dead of winter, during a blizzard, it is a lethal, freezing wasteland, entirely exposed to high-velocity winds. The drive took over 2 hours. The paved highway eventually ran out, giving way to deeply rutted, unmaintained dirt tracks. The minivan slid and clawed its way over miles of ice-covered gravel. Out here, the darkness is absolute. There is no ambient city glow to light the horizon. The snow drove horizontally across the windshield, mesmerizing and blinding. The temperature gauge on the dashboard registered single digits. There are no cell phone towers in the West Desert. There are no gas stations, no emergency call boxes, no passing patrols. If a vehicle breaks down on that remote dirt track in December, the occupants are in immediate, life-threatening danger from severe exposure. Yet, the minivan pushed forward into the blackness. The heater blasted inside the cabin, keeping the sleeping toddlers warm while the frozen landscape rolled past the windows. He claimed they arrived at the desolate campsite, set up the small generator in the deep snow, aimed a space heater at the boys, and slept in the front seat while the blizzard hammered the metal chassis of the van. He claimed this was a normal family outing. He claimed he sat in the freezing darkness of a desert wasteland, surrounded by miles of empty, frozen earth, simply watching the snow fall. He claimed his wife was sleeping safely in her bed 50 miles away, but the purse remained on the counter. The fan continued to blast air over the damp, chemical-soaked carpet, and the sun was beginning to rise on a Monday morning where nothing would ever be the same again. Monday morning breaks over the snow-choked Salt Lake Valley. The temperature remains brutal, the sky a flat, unbroken gray. Miles away from the desolate expanse of the West Desert, the missing woman's alarm clock rings unanswered in the empty master bedroom. At 9 a.m., her desk at the local bank branch remains empty. This immediate deviation from her rigid professional routine triggers the first wave of institutional concern. She was a woman who lived entirely by the calendar and the clock. Missing a shift without a phone call was a severe anomaly that completely contradicted her psychological profile. Simultaneously, a local daycare provider notices the absence of the 2 toddlers. The morning drop-off window closes. Calls to both parents' cell phones ring endlessly before dropping to voicemail. Recognizing the extreme irregularity, the provider escalates the situation, contacting the emergency numbers listed on the boys' enrollment forms. The husband's mother and sister-in-law are notified. They drive slowly through the icy, unplowed streets to the split-level home on Sarah Circle, arriving to find the driveway buried in fresh powder and the front door locked tight. The windows are heavily frosted over from the inside, revealing nothing of the interior. Feeling a sharp spike of dread, they dial the authorities. West Valley City police officers arrive shortly after noon to conduct a standard welfare check. They pound heavily on the front door. Absolute silence answers them. They circle the perimeter of the property, heavy boots crunching loudly through the deep snow. Finding a side window secured but vulnerable, an officer breaks the glass, reaches through the jagged opening, and unlocks the frame. Stepping inside, the officers are immediately hit by a wall of warm, stagnant air and a bizarre auditory backdrop. The house is completely still, save for the relentless, mechanical whine of the industrial carpet fan spinning in the center of the living room. The sensory anchors in the space paint a disjointed, deeply alarming picture. There is the sharp, undeniable stench of chemical upholstery, cleaner cutting through the stale, heated air. The synthetic carpet fibers directly beneath the spinning fan blades are cold and damp to the touch. Moving into the kitchen, bathed in the dull afternoon light filtering through the snow-dusted windows, investigators find the ultimate paradox. The missing woman's leather purse rests squarely on the laminate counter. Inside, officers find her wallet, her identification, her car keys, and her cell phone. Her heavy winter coat remains draped precisely over the back of a dining room chair. Her entire logistical lifeline to the outside world is sitting exactly where she left it. The house is completely intact, but the family has vanished. The initial theory leans toward a catastrophic accident. Perhaps the family packed into the minivan to escape a malfunctioning furnace and succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning on the road. Perhaps they slid off an icy embankment into a hidden ravine during the height of the blizzard. Detectives immediately request emergency pings on the husband's cell phone, but the network registers the device as completely powered down. He is effectively a ghost, operating entirely off the grid while a massive winter storm buries the state. By mid-afternoon, the quiet suburban street transforms into a staging ground. Marked cruisers idle loudly along the curb, their exhaust plumes thick in the freezing air. Crime scene tape is unspooled across the frozen lawn. Detectives move methodically through the home, photographing the damp carpet spots, the untouched winter gear, and the eerie absence of any physical struggle. The house is too clean. The fan simply hums on. The waiting game stretches into the early evening. The sun dips below the Oquirrh Mountains, plunging the neighborhood back into sub-zero darkness. Then, at approximately 5 p.m., a blue minivan slowly turns onto Sarah Circle. The vehicle pulls into the driveway, its engine ticking as it idles, instantly flanked by uniformed officers and glaring police spotlights. The driver's side door opens. The husband steps out into the freezing air. The narrative pacing halts. He is not frantic. He is not hyperventilating. He exhibits zero physical signs of panic, adrenaline, or distress. He calmly observes the armada of police vehicles surrounding his property. When confronted by investigators demanding to know the whereabouts of his wife, his reaction defies all fundamental human psychology. He offers a slight, confused shrug. He casually informs the bewildered detectives that he assumed it was Sunday. He claims he simply lost track of the days while out camping in the desert and thought she was at work. The officers stare at him in disbelief. They point out the severe blizzard conditions that paralyzed the region overnight. They note the lethal temperatures. They extract the two small boys from the rear of the van, children who appear grimy and exhausted but uninjured. The husband maintains a flat, apathetic affect. He insists he'd left the house shortly after midnight, driving through the blinding storm to set up a generator in the frozen dirt of Simpson Springs, specifically to test out new camping gear. Investigators press him on the fatal flaw in his logic. They ask why his wife's purse, keys, and phone are locked inside the house if she had gone to her bank job. He offers no logical response, only a detached, mild surprise. He does not ask if she has been found. He does not plead for the police to launch a search party. His primary concern, expressed while standing in his driveway as his family unit fractures permanently, is whether he can go inside the house to get warm. Word of the disappearance detonates across the West Valley City community. The local LDS ward, tightly knit and deeply invested in the missing woman's life, mobilizes overnight. Command centers are rapidly established in church gymnasiums. Volunteers print thousands of missing person flyers, taping them to telephone poles, gas station windows, and grocery store bulletin boards. The social echo is visceral. Fear permeates the neighborhood. Initially, the community fears a random abduction, a violent predator stalking the quiet, snow-covered streets. But as details of the husband's bizarre midnight camping trip inevitably leak to the public, the collective dread sharply shifts focus. The monster was not an unknown drifter. The threat had been living quietly inside the house on Sarah Circle. Rumors ignite across local forums and neighborhood watch networks. Parishioners who had spoken to the missing woman just 24 hours earlier struggle to reconcile her vibrant energy with the desolate void she left behind. They organize grid searches, trudging through waist-deep snowbanks along the foothills, driven by a desperate need to find her before the freezing temperatures claim any chance of survival. Meanwhile, the husband actively distances himself from the massive volunteer effort. He does not distribute flyers. He does not attend the emotional candlelight vigils. He locks the doors of his house, draws the heavy blinds, and retreats into the solitary glow of his computer monitor, leaving the terrified community to search the frozen wasteland entirely alone. The interrogation room was deliberately cramped, the air sterile and perfectly temperature-controlled to induce a subtle physical discomfort. Detectives sat across from the husband, watching his physiological responses with intense scrutiny. He did not exhibit the frantic, vibrating energy typical of a man whose family had just been torn apart. Instead, he slouched deeply into the hard plastic chair, offering vague, non-committal murmurs. When pressed on the glaring logistical impossibilities of his midnight desert excursion, he simply deflected. He complained about the harsh fluorescent lighting buzzing overhead. He requested a glass of water, his hand perfectly steady as he took a sip. He absolutely refused to make prolonged eye contact. Then, recognizing the tactical disadvantage of continuing the conversation, he calmly invoked his right to legal counsel. The invisible wall of silence crashed down, engineered by a lifetime of psychological conditioning. Law enforcement immediately pivoted their vast resources to the hostile expanse of Simpson Springs. The West Desert swallowed the massive search effort whole. Dozens of tactical officers, specialized cadaver dog units, and off-road vehicles combed through the frozen sagebrush. The psychological toll of searching this absolute void was immense. Detectives chased phantoms across the ice. The air smelled of aviation fuel as helicopters ran low-level grid patterns, their rotors kicking up blinding clouds of white powder. Footprints found near a remote limestone ridge sent a sudden surge of adrenaline through the mobile command center, only for forensic analysts to match the tread pattern to a local rancher's utility truck 3 days later. It was a crushing dead end. They shifted their focus to the region's hundreds of undocumented, abandoned mining shafts. Tactical teams anchored heavy winch systems into the frozen earth, dropping high-definition fiber-optic cameras down narrow, 100-foot vertical drops. The operators stared intently at the glowing monitors inside their heated vans. They found nothing but stagnant black water, rusted machinery, and jagged, dead rock. The sheer geographic scale of the Utah wilderness had morphed into the primary antagonist, actively fighting the investigation at every turn. While the police force was freezing in the high desert, the husband executed a highly calculated logistical maneuver. He secured a compact rental car. Over the next 48 hours, while his own property remained cordoned off by yellow crime scene tape, he logged nearly 800 miles on the sedan's digital odometer. When finally questioned about this massive discrepancy, he claimed he was simply driving the local valley grid, desperately looking for his missing spouse. Experienced detectives knew this was a mathematical absurdity. 800 miles provided the exact geographical range needed to cross into several neighboring states, navigate remote logging roads, and return. Investigators theorized this critical window was used to execute the final phase of his plan, moving the primary evidence from a temporary staging ground to a permanent, undiscoverable grave. Back at the split-level home, forensics systematically dismantled the interior. Technicians sprayed the floorboards with chemical reagents, plunging the living room into darkness to hunt for the telltale blue luminescent glow of hidden proteins. The damp sections of the rug, the exact areas dried by the whining industrial fan, yielded microscopic traces of human blood. DNA analysis quickly matched the sample to the missing woman. It was a minimal amount, completely insufficient to legally prove a fatal event in a court of law, but more than enough to obliterate the husband's camping trip narrative. His blue minivan was subsequently impounded and processed. The enclosed cabin smelled overwhelmingly of harsh, pine-scented chemical solvents. The upholstery on the front passenger seat had been heavily scrubbed, the fibers stiff and distorted from bleach. Sensing the tightening investigative net, the husband packed his remaining belongings, loaded the two toddlers, and fled across state lines under the cover of darkness. He retreated to the oppressive, insular safety of his father's home in Washington state. This maneuver forced the investigation to radically adapt, requiring Utah detectives to navigate complex interstate jurisdictions, secure federal assistance, and cut through sluggish bureaucratic red tape. The case ground into a grueling psychological war of attrition. Months dragged into years. Detectives meticulously built their probable cause, finally securing a comprehensive multi-agency search warrant for the patriarch's residence in Puyallup. The subsequent raid was executed with clinical, overwhelming precision. Tactical units breached the cluttered, suffocating home at dawn. What they uncovered inside the physical and electronic archives was the manifestation of a deeply sick psychological environment. They seized thousands of digital files, dozens of hard drives, and stacks of meticulously indexed handwritten journals. Investigators sat in darkened viewing rooms for weeks, grimly cataloging the seized media. They watched endless hours of grainy camcorder footage filmed entirely by the father-in-law. The sheer volume of voyeuristic material targeting his own daughter-in-law was staggering. The digital cache completely validated every terrified whisper the victim had recorded in her own hidden diaries years earlier. The patriarchal sickness of the family was laid bare, documented by their own hands. This massive discovery violently shifted the legal landscape. The father-in-law was arrested and eventually convicted on severe felony charges completely unrelated to the disappearance, but fundamentally tied to his predatory, obsessive nature. The ultimate enabler had been removed from the board. With the patriarch incarcerated, Child Protective Services immediately moved to extract the two young boys from the toxic environment. Temporary legal custody was awarded to the victims' parents. The children, however, were already severely traumatized. They exhibited deeply disturbing, highly conditioned behaviors learned inside the Washington house, instinctively hoarding food and flinching at loud noises. During routine psychological evaluations, the older boy began making fragmented, chilling statements to licensed caseworkers. He casually mentioned taking a long ride in the dark. He stated flatly that his mother was sleeping in the trunk. He described her coming with them to the freezing desert, but told the therapists she decided to stay out there, hidden deep in the crystal holes. The innocent, childlike phrasing masked a terrifying reality. Detectives scrambled to analyze his words, cross-referencing maps to match his descriptions to specific geological formations, limestone caves, or geode beds in the West Desert. But a traumatized child's perception of distance, time, and direction is severely distorted. The coordinates were permanently lost in the vast, unforgiving landscape. The husband recognized his absolute control was slipping. Stripped of his primary enabler, facing relentless national media scrutiny, and rapidly losing his legal grip on the children, his psychological framework began to collapse. The state family court mandated that his visitation rights be strictly supervised by an external social worker. He could no longer isolate and program his sons. The legal walls were closing in rapidly, backing a dangerous, control-obsessed narcissist into a corner, and setting the stage for a final, catastrophic assertion of dominance. Sunday, February 5th. The supervised visitation took place at a rented home in Graham. The caseworker parked and escorted the boys toward the porch. They ran ahead. The front door opened. The children crossed the threshold. Then, it violently slammed shut. The brass deadbolt clicked. The caseworker stood stranded. She hammered on the frame, demanding entry. Silence. Moving to the front window, she detected a suffocating chemical odor seeping through the glass seals. Raw gasoline. Retreating to the driveway, she frantically contacted emergency dispatch, reporting the lockout and the overpowering stench of accelerant. Inside the sealed perimeter, the final act of absolute control commenced. The man did not simply pour fuel, he armed himself with a hatchet, inflicting fatal trauma to the heads of his own sons. He ensured they would never heal and never speak in a courtroom. Then he ignited the vapors. The explosion shattered the neighborhood. A shockwave blew the windows outward in a shower of jagged debris. The roof physically separated from the structural beams, collapsing into a roaring column of flame. The fire burned with such intense heat that arriving crews were forced to simply watch the framing disintegrate. When the ash finally cooled, dental records were required to identify the bodies. He had erased the final living links to his missing wife, permanently dragging the truth into the flames. There is no conventional justice here, no courtroom verdict, no prison sentence. Just a scorched foundation in Washington and a frozen expanse in the Utah desert that refuses to yield its secrets. The family Susan fought so desperately to build was dismantled by the exact toxic control she tried to escape. Her parents were left navigating an infinite void, mourning a daughter and 2 grandsons used as final pawns. The West Desert remains completely silent. As winter winds scour the jagged limestone of Simpson Springs, the earth holds on to the truth, leaving behind only the terrifying reality of absolute ownership. If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video.